I'm just so happy to be here. I have to tell you, I went to the cocktail party earlier, and there's just such energy and enthusiasm and sense of what have we accomplished. I heard about how this started with a group of about 6 women who said, we're going to make a difference. We're going to raise the money, and we're going to help other women. And it shows, as Margaret Mead said a long time ago, it takes a small group of thoughtful, committed people to change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And here you are in Akron, changing your community and the world, because your ripples make a difference. So I'd like to have this wonderful opportunity to talk about women in power tonight. And to start off, I'd ask you not to stand up, but to close your eyes. And just to imagine somebody in power. So would you all close your eyes? Okay, have you all thought about somebody in power? Okay, now will you open your eyes? Okay, how many of you thought of women? That is so great, about half of you. Which is pretty good, given that the name of my speech is Women in Power. And I have to tell you, that's a higher percentage than almost any audience I've ever spoken in front of. So congratulations. But still, the fact that it's only half shows the challenges we face. Because really, one of the big issues that I've seen in this country is that it is really hard to imagine women in power. It's if you think about why it is that, you have these terrific women, and somebody said, I think John said, women are amazing. They may be amazing, but there are more people called John than there are women head of Fortune 500 companies. I don't know if you should clap to that. There are women presidents in Argentina, not good ones. I do make value judgments. Brazil, Chile, Germany, Great Britain, India, Jamaica, all across the world. And we haven't even nominated a woman to be head of a woman president here in the United States. We got to change that. And part of the reason you think about why is it that we in the United States have such a problem with women in power? Why do you think that is? Why can other countries see it and we can't? Part of the reason, I think, is because we are a democracy. And so in countries in which you've had kings and queens, they've had queens. So they've had queens in which they can envision a queen who is in power. We've never seen that. Part of the reason, I think, is that our tradition is that we're a Judeo-Christian country and our God is male. We can get into that if you want to. I discussed this with some of your leadership. They said, watch it, Kathleen. And we're also a Protestant country. If we were a Catholic country, at least we'd have Queen Mary and a lot of Catholic saints, which some of you may have heard of. I'm fighting on my audience here. But there are a lot of women saints, so that at least you're accustomed to seeing saints but we don't have that. And so when you don't have this sort of the classic, when you're growing up, who are your heroes? And then if you think about American history, they're often the Pilgrims. They're usually guys, cowboys and Indians, guys. Then you think about what are the holidays in the United States. Veterans Day, Memorial Day. I mean, until recently, they were soldiers, guys. President's Day, unfortunately, guys. The 18 men here, I'm not against you. I'm just explaining the problems about this. I know we have Mother's Day, but Freud said all our problems come from our mothers. So that's not totally... I know, but Mom is great, but it's not the same as being head of a Fortune 500 company. And I just want to be clear about that. I'm talking about women in political power or business power, not just power in the family, and not just power behind the throne, power on the throne. And that is a very tough thing. It also comes, and we have this very clearly in the United States, the issue of what it means to be a woman. In France and in Latin America, you can be both sexy and powerful. Nod your head. In the United States, it's very hard to be sexy and powerful. You can be sexy, I've heard. I'm an actor, dinner speaker, what do you expect? But very frankly, if people think you're sexy, they don't think you're powerful, and if they think you're powerful, there's another problem. And then, unlike in France, you can be both. So these are the challenges, and then there are particular issues, and Mary and I were talking about that, about women judging other women on your hair. I mean, I cannot tell you how many women have criticized me for letting my hair look this color. Well, that's one person said that out of an audience of 350. No, but it's actually, I'm just explaining that we all, every man sort of has the same haircut. Or they don't have any hair. But women, you all have different haircuts, and you all have a different color. So every time you walk into a room and you have a different suit, another woman makes a judgment. What is she doing with her hair? Why hasn't she brushed it? Or why has she gone and spent $40 at the hairdresser? Whatever they're judging you. And they're not judging you. I'm telling you all the studies. I know them well. They're not judging you on what you say. They're judging you on what you look like. So this makes it difficult. And part of what we have to do as women is say, forget it. We can judge you on what you do, and we can say you also look great. No matter what you look like, you look great. And part of this is really being able to say to each of you, we support you, and we want to help you. And that's what this in women's empowerment is really all about. Because what I've learned in my life is how critical it is, the messages that you get from people around you. I know you're often told you have to follow your own path. You've heard that message?
Yes.
Don't believe it.
Okay.
And the reason I say don't believe it is because your own path is so often shaped by the messages that you're given that it's hard to determine what your own path is, because it's often shaped by what your mother teaches you and your father teaches you and your siblings and the community in which you live. You cannot escape that. And therefore, if you want to change the world or change other people's paths, you have to change the community. And I speak from personal experience. Let me just tell you. Some of you may know that I grew up in a political family. So, my uncle was president of the United States. My father ran for president. My Uncle Teddy ran for president. And my Uncle Sarge ran for president, right? So you might think, oh, of course I was going to run for political office. But when I was growing up, what did all the women do in my family? They raised kids. And my mother had 11 children, which had its own issues. So it never occurred to me when I was growing up that I would run for political office. That's what guys did. That's not what women did. Women raised kids and did fundraisers. And it wasn't until I went to college and there was the growth of the women's movement that occurred to me that I could run for office, or at least go to law school and then run for office. So it teaches me, you can grow up in the most wonderful family, and I did, but it's really what the community teaches you and says to you that helps to shape who you are. Similarly, when I ran for Congress in 1986, at that point I had 3 children, 3 daughters, and I can't tell you how many people said, how can you run for office? You should be home taking care of your children. And I said, you know, when my father ran for president, he had 10 kids. And I bet nobody said to him, stay home. And what happened, the Anita Hill hearings occurred in 1992. In 1994, I ran for lieutenant governor. And not one person said to me, and by that time I had 4 kids. My kids, I wasn't really good at family planning. I admit it. You do not, you anyway. But I have my 4th daughter is wonderful. She's 23 and she's about to go to medical school. So, you know, things can turn out okay. Anyway, who is this guy? I'm so glad you were invited. Okay, so anyway, but in 1994 I ran for lieutenant governor and nobody asked me how could I have 4 kids and run for office. And I'll tell you another thing about that year. It was after Anita Hill. So in 1992 there were 3 women lieutenant governors in the country. In 1994, 21 were elected. So, I know. So it shows you things can change quickly. Progress doesn't go like this. It can go like, and you just have to be prepared. If I hadn't run before, I wouldn't be prepared. You have to be prepared for the opportunity, even though it looks dreary and grim for a long period of time. If you're prepared, you can grab it. So part of what my message is tonight is, 1, as an individual, you want to be prepared, but 2, as a community, you want to help the community be prepared for the great women that are there. And that's really what I learned. So what I did learn growing up, and I just want to talk a little bit about my growing up, because it's kind of a riot. I'm not kidding. And it's interesting, and I thought you might like to hear. And I think you came here to hear to talk about. So I grew up, as I told you, in this political family in which we were really taught that we needed to make a contribution, and my mother and father wanted us to know what was going on in the world. So, for instance, when most 4- and 5-year-olds were taken by their mother to the playground, my mother took me to the Senate Racket Committee hearings. Because my father was the chief prosecutor, so some of my first words were, I refuse to answer that question. It's kind of strange. And then when as I got a little older, we would sit around the table and we would have, every night at dinner, we had to recite, current events. And of course, it was very important where you sat at my mother's table with our 11 of, well, there were at that point about 8 of us. So if you sat right next to Mommy, you just had to read the front page, but as you went around the table, you really had to know what was going on. And then my mother thought this was such a good idea that when she drove the carpool, she insisted everybody in the carpool had to recite current events. When I drove the carpool, my children wouldn't allow me to speak. So that was, you get a sense of, and my father and my mother, not only did we have to know current events, we also had to know history. We were quizzed on history, and every Sunday we either had to recite a poem or do a report on a famous person in history. Yeah. Just the expectations were high. Okay, we can get into that in a little bit. Speaking of high expectations, we're talking about mothers. Well, I had a grandmother who had the same views. So you may have heard. So my grandmother, my parents thought it was a good idea that we write my grandmother letters, and she would send them back redlined. Thank you. Correcting our grammar and our diction and our spelling. So I, as a young child, didn't have a warm feeling about my grandmother. No, I really didn't. And then she, when my parents went away, she would come and take care of us. And I remember once, I was visiting her, and she was making oatmeal. No, it was a cream of wheat. And some fell on the floor. And I thought, well, you should clean it up. She said, no, you have to eat it. She said, you have to have a peck of dirt before you get to heaven. You can't believe this, can you? Okay. Well, it's all true. So, I didn't have this warm feeling about my grandmother, with reason, right? But that all changed. I'm going to end with something happy. So when she was about 75, she started to slow down, and she started to be home more often. And so I saw her a lot. And she wanted, so she used to travel the world, but then at 75 she slowed down. And she'd like to take 2-mile walks every morning and every afternoon, and she'd always recruit one of the grandchildren to walk with her, and I, as the oldest of all the grandchildren, would walk with her. And I found it fascinating, and I found it fascinating, particularly that I want to show you for this group. Number one, she told lots of stories. As you know, seniors often tell stories, and they tell you mostly about their childhood and what they really care about. She talked only about her childhood, not about her own children. And her children, as you remember, were pretty successful. So you might think she was proud of that. No, what she talked about was her own childhood. 2 things were really struck me. One, she was the daughter of the first Irish Catholic mayor ever elected mayor of Boston. And she talked about how she wanted to be just as good as the children of the Protestant kids at that time, because the Irish were looked down on. There were still the signs, help wanted, no Irish need apply. And how at one point she was really excited that the Abbey players would come from Ireland, and that they would, from Dublin, and that they were the great play, and the play actors, and they would show that the Irish in fact were smart and cultured. And then she said, and then they came and they showed Synge's The Playboy of the Western World, which showed the Irish to be drunken, womenizing louts. 60 years later, she was still cursing that play because she was so embarrassed, and because she wanted to be seen as something cultured and didn't feel that way. And then after we would take those walks, she would go upstairs and study her French and German lessons until she was 94 years old. And she'd say, because you'll never know, before I tell you that, the other thing she'd do, she'd have famous quotations all over her sweater, which she would memorize if it got boring during the walk, because she said, you'll never know when somebody's going to ask you to give a speech, you'll have to say something appropriate. Okay, but the other thing which is particularly relevant for this, is that she then said, she'd go up and study her French and German records, and she said, because, who will come visit? Somebody from France or Germany, so I have to speak to them. But the fact is, that wasn't really why she was studying her French and German records. The fact is that when she was in high school, she wanted to go to Wellesley College, which required 2 languages. And her father didn't let her go to Wellesley because it was a Protestant college, and he sent her to a convent in France. So she never got to go to college. And she really regretted that she never got that opportunity. And she always wanted to be able to say that she went as college educated, and she was smart, and she had something to offer. And so it taught me that women who can produce terrific children, right, still want to do something on their own and still want to be able to make a contribution on their own. And so what you're doing by helping women do that is critically important. Absolutely critically important. And one of the things that I want to just emphasize that I think is, all that you do is important on careers and helping women on health and mental health, but also really on abuse. And let me just tell you one of the things that I really focused on when I was lieutenant governor was really violence against women, which is an issue that really addresses women of all backgrounds, and really goes to, I think, the lack of power that many women face. I had hearings across the state of Maryland about abuse because we were trying to figure out what we should do about violence against women, and so we had hearings. And there are two stories that really struck me, and I remember to this day. One was from a sixth grade teacher, sixth graders, I remember 12-year-olds, and she told the story about how one of her students came into the classroom and she was beaten up. She was obviously abused. And she thought, well, it was probably the father or the mother's boyfriend, which is often the case of where the child was abused. So she said to the girl, "Who beat you up?" And the girl said, "Well, my boyfriend beat me up." And so the teacher told her, said, "Well, get rid of him." And the girl said, "I'd rather have a boyfriend that beats me up than no boyfriend at all." Which said to the teacher and to all of us how often people stay because they don't feel they have the courage of their own. They feel they are nobody without a man. And therefore, we have to help them feel that they are strong and they don't need a man to take care of them or to go down the street and feel that that's the person who will make them feel good. After she said that, it really struck me that a lot of our issues are psychological because the girl was in that abusive relationship. And then a kindergarten teacher testified that she said, so this is a terrible thing to say, but I'm quoting somebody. She said, I can tell in kindergarten which kids are going to be the abusers and which kids are going to be the abused. And maybe that's not your experience, and I hope it isn't, but that was what she said. So at that point, I looked at how we were spending our mental health dollars, and I realized most of our mental health dollars go to high school students, because who thought that a 5-year-old and 6-year-old needed mental health dollars? So we started to shift some of our mental health dollars, and we increased them. 90s was a great time to be in government. Amen. Under which president? Oh, this is non-political, excuse me. It was still a great time to be in government. We had 2 years of $1 billion surpluses, and we had more money for mental health. And so we put more money into the elementary schools. And I think it made a difference. And I'll tell you one other, let me just end with one other story. So we worked with Johns Hopkins to partner at the beginning with 3 elementary schools. And to do mental health for elementary school kids, you needed their parents' permission. So at one point, a teacher went to the principal and said, these permission slips seem a little weird. Why? So they went to the kids and said, the signatures seemed a little strange on these permission slips for mental health help. And the first grader said, yeah, I mean, in a different, probably not in my accent, but we bribed 3 third graders to sign the permission slips because our parents didn't want us to get the mental health. And we got the third graders to sign them. So the kids themselves knew they needed help, but their parents didn't want to give it. So part of what we learned, and I learned, is is mental health is a big part of women, of all our empowerment, and particularly women's empowerment. Women take more mental health drugs than men by I think, a factor of 5. I'm making that up. I don't know. It's huge. If you told me I'm wrong. I have to be quite careful. But it's a large number. And so, to the extent that you, as women's empowerment, can help to focus early on mental health and to take the stigma away and to help young people and then all of us to build the confidence that we all need. And I'm going to end with this. How do you build confidence? Okay? How do you do it? And you'll be happy to know that I think one of the best ways to build confidence is to ask for money. I know who asked me here. Because, and this is a great thing for young people and for all of us. The more you ask for money, the more you get used to being turned down. Because that's life. But then you realize, who cares? Because I'm doing this for a good cause, and I'll ask the next person, and I'll get better at it, and they'll build up my confidence. And I'll say, it doesn't matter that that person turns me down, because this person says yes. And if you know in politics you get turned, well, you might not know. But really, what I've experienced is that if you want to build your confidence, I mean, this is an easy way. There are a lot of other ways I can tell you about, but one easy way to build your confidence is to practice asking for money. Set out your goal. Say, I'm going to raise money from 5 people or 10 or 15, and just say, I'm going to be okay with 10 people turning me down or 100 people turning down, but the Women's Endowment needs my help. They're doing great things, and I can do it for them. And when you do that, you'll feel great about yourself, and you'll feel great about the community that you're part of. And what is important in all of this is both. You have to feel good about yourself and the friendships you gather. You know, there's my husband teaches philosophy, and he teaches Aristotle. And one of the great questions that Aristotle asks is, what is the most important virtue? Is it justice or is it friendship? And as you can imagine, since I love the Reverend nodding her head, as you can imagine, I'm a lawyer. My father was the Attorney General, and I grew up in the Civil Rights Movement, so I like justice. But Aristotle said friendship's the most important virtue, because justice divides the goods, but it's only friendship that creates the city, and it gets people to stay up late at night and work together and overcome the toughest obstacles. So I want to toast to you and to friendship that will do great things for Akron.